facing Mr. Speaker is 64.1% of the gross domestic product, or GDP, as you are aware. Mr. Speaker, sir, this issue of public debt continues to be a serious issue, especially when the country is struggling both with domestic and foreign borrowing. And the President, Dr. William Ruto, on several occasions, has averred and stated that he is willing to ensure that we stop foreign borrowing to ensure we have a sustainable, Mr. Speaker, public debt in this country. Mr. Speaker, this issue of putting anchoring percentage into GDP of public debt is very critical. At 55%, Mr. Speaker, and in any extreme cases, increasing it by 5% by the Cabinet Secretary in charge of National Treasury, and by only explaining the breach of that 5% increment upon 55% of GDP and explaining it to the Parliament, Mr. Speaker. The Speaker, when you read under Article 201 on the public finance, on the Constitution, sorry, on the principles of public finance, Mr. Speaker, on the public finance, and that is Article 201B, Part C, it says the burdens and benefits of the use of resources and public borrowing shall be shared equitably between present and future generations, Mr. Speaker. So even if it means the borrowing, we must be considerate of the posterity. We must be considerate of what is happening, as had been envisaged in one of the principles, Mr. Speaker, of sustainable public debts or public borrowing by the government, Mr. Speaker. Because we must ensure that the future generations have an inheritance, not only in public debt, Mr. Speaker, but in terms of development. And I think most of this development that has been done, for example, by Kibaki administration, Thika Super Highway, the people who borrowed them might not appreciate then when they were borrowing to ensure that that bypass, Mr. Speaker, or that road being expanded, Thika Super Highway, they might not have appreciated. But now, many years down the line, when Nairobi has expanded and we have a huge population in Nairobi and use of that road, Mr. Speaker, now we are now valuing, Mr. Speaker. So, Speaker, the anchoring of debt in percentage is very critical, because this is the best international best practice. So this amendment, Mr. Speaker, is a straightforward amendment. What we are amending under Public Finance Management Act of 2023 is very straight, because we are just doing what we call best practices in terms of ensuring that we get our debt anchored in percentage, Mr. Speaker. And this will allow government to operate. You remember, Mr. Speaker, in unprecedented times during COVID, and you wanted to raise public debt, Mr. Speaker, you could imagine the challenges that came with it in terms of raising quorum, in terms of getting senators to vote. There was the issue of non-physical contact, Mr. Speaker, social distancing. And I think in unforeseeable challenges like COVID, I'm using that as an example, Mr. Speaker, it will be very important. I have seen on many occasions, and now that the public debt of this country is 10 trillion, Mr. Speaker, it must be what we call discipline in terms of management of public resources. Even as we anchor, Mr. Speaker, into public debt, the commitment of government and President William Ruto has been to ensure at all points, Mr. Speaker, sir, fight against corruption becomes at the center. Because we don't have to borrow, Mr. Speaker, huge chunks of money, put the country in a public debt where we were nearing economic crisis, and allow corrupt individuals within and without government, Mr. Speaker, to blunder or mismanagement, Mr. Speaker, on wastage of public funds, yet that money has been borrowed, Mr. Speaker. Even on the individual level, Mr. Speaker, you have never seen individuals where they borrow money to go and kupiga sherehe, Mr. Speaker, or take chai and mandazi. Everybody who borrows a loan from the bank would want to account for each and every single coin. Mr. Speaker, if we are translating the same commitment, the way we translate to taking our personal loans and mortgages, Mr. Speaker, this country would have gone. So I agree with the President that the commitment against the fight of corruption be a top priority, not only national government and county governments. We have heard about the pending bills in Vihiga County, for example, where Senator Outsourcing has brought to the attention of the House. Mr. Speaker, we want to loud government, and you have had a former governor confess on the floor of the House that during their tenure since the inception of devolution, under Article 219 of the Constitution 2010, Mr. Speaker, sir, money has not been dispensed, has not been given out, Mr. Speaker, at an opportune or on time. Mr. Speaker, for example, Nandi in the month of June and July have received over 1.2 billion in terms of cash disbursement. Even the CDF to members of National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, there is no reason as to why our businessmen and women across the country, counties and national government, Mr. Speaker, should continue suffer, yet there is a sufficient money, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, us as the protectors of devolution, yesterday the Intergovernmental Technical Relations Committee appeared before the Devolution Committee of the Senate, and they made assertion that national government is yet to release 272 billion to follow functions that have been devolved. What does that translate? The national government devolved function without following with costing. 272 billion, that is a huge and chunk of money, Mr. Speaker, that is even more than enough that we are giving counties of 385.3 billion in this financial year of 2023-2024. So we need as a Senate, Mr. Speaker, to play also our role. If 272 billion is lying in Nairobi instead of being allocated to 47 counties, Mr. Speaker, then we must work hard towards achieving that end, Mr. Speaker. I am happy that in terms of borrowing, Mr. Speaker, there was a circular, I don't know whether it's circular or the law of the PMF Act, that any borrowing by the counties, Mr. Speaker, must be guaranteed by national government. Mr. Speaker, for example, at the tail end of the last Senate session, before it lapsed when Sina died, the Laikipia County government made an application for approval of